人間の死生観は完全に覆る。本編その2。人間の自由意志はどのようにして生じるのか。1。
Newtonian determinism says that the universe is a clock, a gigantic clock that's wound up at the beginning of time, and it's been ticking ever since according to Newton's laws of motion. So, what you're going to eat 10 years from now, on January 1st, has already been fixed. It's already known using Newton's laws of motion. Einstein believed in that. Einstein was a determinist. Does that mean that a murderer, a horrible mass murderer, isn't really guilty of his works because it was already preordained billions of years ago? And Einstein said, well, yeah, in some sense that's true. Even mass murderers were predetermined. But he said they should still be placed in jail. Heisenberg then comes along and proposes the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and says, nonsense. There's uncertainty. You don't know where the electron is. It could be here, here, or many places simultaneously. This, of course, Einstein hated because he said God doesn't play dice with the universe. Well, hey, get used to it. Einstein was wrong. God does play dice. Every time we look at an electron, it moves. There's uncertainty with regards to the position of the electron. So what does that mean for free will? It means in some sense we do have some kind of free will. No one can determine your future events given your past history. There's always the wild card. There's always the possibility of uncertainty in whatever we do. So when I look at myself in a mirror, I say to myself, what I'm looking at is not really me. It looks like me, but it's not really me at all. It's not me today, now. It's me a billionth of a second ago because it takes a billionth of a second for light to go from me to the mirror and back.
人間に自由意志が存在するのか否かについて、科学は今まで客観性を最重要してきたため、意識という主観的な問題を客観的に捉える手法がないので、無機質科学を研究してきた人が意識について実におかしな説明をしています。それは人間が自分の意思として行動を起こしても、その人の過去からの行動傾向が蓄積され、そこから機械的に反応行動をしているに過ぎず、唯物世界の自然は人間のその機械的な反応行動を人間に幻想として見せつけて、あたかも自分の意思で行動を起こしたかのような錯覚に陥らせる、などと言っています。これはなんとも大笑いな説明です。唯物世界の自然は人間に幻想や錯覚を抱かせて人間個々人をこの宇宙の中心にいるように錯覚させるという詐欺師的な存在であり、人間がその詐欺行為に気づいたら、唯物世界の自然は詐欺師として警察に訴えられるでしょう。人間の脳には自由意志は存在せず、ロボットのような反応機械であるとするなら、新発明や新発見は全くの偶発事象として起きるので、新発明や新発見はかなり少なくなるはずです。さらに意識が幻想なら、なぜ行動した後の反省やら、後悔の念が湧き起こるのでしょうか。もはや、行動がそれしか取り得なかったのなら、反省や後悔の念は全く不必要なものであり、初めからそんな感情は起きないはずです。さらに意識そのものが幻想なら、意識の中の幻想である夢知覚は、現実と夢との区別はどのようになされるのでしょうか。それに、生物には自由意志がなく、無意識が決める行動プロセスに沿うだけなら、それは人間が出現する以前から起きている事象でしょうから、自動運転走行する車の大集団を想像すればわかるように、生物は多様性が減少して均等化が進むはずです。こんな馬鹿げた説明をして、唯物論を守りたいのでしょうが、唯物科学は人間の意識やイメージについて全く説明できないと、素直に答えた方が人類のためになります。何のために自然が人間に幻想を見せて、人間が自分の意思を持っているように錯覚に陥らせる必要があるのでしょうか。次は、 哲学者のジョン・サールがセルンで、意識について講演した際の映像です。自由意志は幻想でしょうか？
Consciousness? Well, it's a curiously neglected subject, both in our scientific and our philosophical culture. Why is that curious? Well, it is the most important aspect of our lives for a very simple logical reason. Namely, it's a necessary condition on anything being important in our lives that we're conscious. You care about science, philosophy, music, art, whatever. It's no good if you're a zombie or in a coma, right? So consciousness is number one. All right, now we've got, that's the first reason for talking about consciousness. The second reason is that when people do get interested in it, as I think they should, they tend to say the most appalling things. And I'm not going to attempt to conceal from you some of the most appalling things that have been said about consciousness. And then even when they're not saying appalling things and they're really trying to do serious research, well, it's been slow. Progress has been slow. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the difficulties. When I first got interested in this, I thought, well, it's a straightforward problem in biology. Let's get these brain stabbers to get busy and figure out how it works in the brain. So I went over to UCSF and I talked to all the heavy-duty neurobiologists there, and they showed some impatience, as scientists often do when you ask them embarrassing questions. But the thing that struck me is one guy said, an exasperated, very famous neurobiologist, he said, look, in my discipline, it's okay to be interested in consciousness, but get tenure first. Get tenure first. Now, I think I've been working on this for a long time. I think now you might actually get tenure by working on consciousness. If so, that's a real step forward. Okay, now why then is this curious reluctance and curious hostility to consciousness? Well, I think it's a combination of two features of our intellectual culture that like to think they're opposing each other, but in fact they share a common set of assumptions. Consciousness is not a part of the physical world. It's a part of the spiritual world. It belongs to the soul, and the soul is not a part of the physical world. That's the tradition of God, the soul, and immortality. There's another tradition that thinks it's opposed to this, but accepts the worst assumption. That tradition thinks that we are heavy-duty scientific materialists. Consciousness is not a part of the physical world. Either it doesn't exist at all, or it's something else, a computer program, or some damn fool thing. But in any case, it's not part of science. And I used to get an argument that really gave me a stomachache. Here's how it went. Science is objective. Consciousness is subjective. Therefore, there cannot be a science of consciousness. Now, I love that argument because it's got a wonderful fallacy of ambiguity over the concept of objectivity. And I've already used up too much time just clearing my breath, so to speak, but I want to get to that. Okay, so that's these twin traditions are paralyzing us. It's very hard to get out of these twin traditions. And I have only one real message in this lecture, and that is consciousness is a biological phenomenon like photosynthesis, digestion, mitosis. You know all the biological phenomena. And once you accept that, most, though not all, of the hard problems about consciousness simply evaporate. And I'm going to go through some of them. Okay, now I promise you to tell you some of the outrageous things said about consciousness. And just because of shortage of time, I'm only going to mention 4 of the worst. 1, consciousness does not exist. It's an illusion, like sunsets. Science has shown sunsets and rainbows are illusions, so consciousness is an illusion. 2, well, maybe it exists, but it's really something else. It's a computer program running in the brain. 3, no, the only thing that exists is really behavior. It's embarrassing how influential behaviorism was, but I'll get back to that. And 4, maybe consciousness exists, but it can't make any difference to the world. How could spirituality move anything? And whenever somebody tells me that, I think, you want to see spirituality move something? Watch. I decide consciously to raise my arm, and the damn thing goes up. Furthermore, notice this. We do not say, well, it's a bit like the weather in Geneva. Some days it goes up and some days it doesn't go up. No, it goes up whenever I damn well want it to. Okay, I'm going to tell you how that's possible. Now, I haven't yet given you a definition. You can't do this if you don't give a definition. People always say, consciousness is very hard to define. I think it's rather easy to define if you're not trying to give a scientific definition. We're not ready for a scientific definition, but here's a common sense definition. Consciousness consists of all those states of feeling or sentience or awareness. It begins in the morning when you wake up from a dreamless sleep, and it goes on all day till you fall asleep or die or otherwise become unconscious. Dreams are a form of consciousness on this definition. Now that's the common sense definition. That's our target. If you're not talking about that, you're not talking about consciousness. But they think, well, if that's it, that's an awful problem. How can such a thing exist as part of the real world? And this, if you've ever had a philosophy course, this is known as the famous mind-body problem. I think that has a simple solution too. I'm going to give it to you. And here it is. All of our conscious states, without exception, are caused by lower level neurobiological processes in the brain, and they are realized in the brain as higher level or system features. It's about as mysterious as the liquidity of water, right? The liquidity is not an extra juice squirted out by the H2O molecules. It's a condition that the system is in. And just as the jar full of water can go from liquid to solid depending on the behavior of the molecules, so your brain can go from a state of being conscious to a state of being unconscious depending on the behavior of the molecules. The famous mind-body problem is that simple. All right, but now we get into some harder questions. Let's specify the exact features of consciousness so that we can then answer those 4 objections that I made to it. Well, the first feature is it's real and irreducible. You can't get rid of it. You see, the distinction between reality and illusion is a distinction between how things consciously seem to us and how they really are. It consciously seems like I like the French arc-en-ciel. It seems like there's an arch in the sky, or it seems like the sun is setting over the mountains. It consciously seems to us, but that's not really happening. But for that distinction between how things consciously seem and how they really are, you can't make that distinction for the very existence of consciousness. Because where the very existence of consciousness is concerned, if it consciously seems to you that you are conscious, you are conscious. I mean, if a bunch of experts come to me and say, we are heavy-duty neurobiologists, and we've done a study of you, Searle, and we're convinced you are not conscious. You are a very cleverly constructed robot. I don't think, well, maybe these guys are right, you know. I don't think that for a moment because, I mean, Descartes may have made a lot of mistakes, but he was right about this. You cannot doubt the existence of your own consciousness. Okay, that's the first feature of consciousness. It's real and irreducible. You cannot get rid of it by showing that it's an illusion in a way that you can with other standard illusions. Okay, the second feature is this one that has been such a source of trouble to us, and that is all of our conscious states have this qualitative character to them. There's something that it feels like to drink beer, which is not what it feels like to do your income tax or listen to music. And this qualitative feel automatically generates a third feature, namely conscious states are by definition subjective in the sense that they only exist as experienced by some human or animal subject, some self that experiences them. Maybe we'll be able to build a conscious machine. Since we don't know how our brains do it, we're not in a position so far to build a conscious machine. Okay, another feature of consciousness is that it comes in unified conscious fields. So I don't just have the sight of the people in front of me and the sound of my voice and the weight of my shoes against the floor, but they occur to me as part of one single great conscious field that stretches forward and backward. That is the key to understanding the enormous power of consciousness. And we have not been able to do that in a robot. The disappointment of robotics derives from the fact that we don't know how to make a conscious robot, so we don't have a machine that can do this.
ジョン・ロジャーズ・サールは、1932年7月31日に生まれる。アメリカの哲学者。主に、言語哲学、心の哲学を専門とする。カリフォルニア大学バークレー校の元名誉教授。人工知能批判で知られ、強い AI と弱い AI や中国語の部屋という思考実験を提案した。講義において、サールは自由意志についての従来の哲学的モデル、古典的モデルには根本的な欠陥があり、それによって 自由意志の理解が妨げられていると主張している。数学的な決定理論を含む古典的モデルによれば、自由意志に基づく行為とは、行為遂行者の心の中で、信念や欲求が因果的に十分に達した時に遂行されるものである。しかし、サールは、自由意志に基づく行為を実現するためには、我々の信念や欲求と行為の間に何らかの飛躍が存在しなければならず、行為者の心にある信念や欲求のみでは、行為を起こさせるためには因果的に不十分なのだと考える。このギャップを、サールは自己と同一視する。非理性的な行為の可能性も、この飛躍によって生じるのであり、非理性的な行為を起こす可能性に常に直面しつつ、理性的な選択を起こすのが、理性を持つ行為者の条件だとサールは主張する。自由意志を脳の中に位置づけすることができるのかについて、サールは次のように考える。ある時間 t1 において、行為者の心には信念や欲求があり、それは続くある時間 t2 において行為として実現されるのであるが、t1 と t2 の間にある飛躍を実際の脳の物理的なプロセスの中にどのように位置づけるのか。t1 と t2 の間の脳のプロセスに物理的因果性が存在するなら、自由意志は決定論的な世界の中の幻想であり、もし因果関係が脳の中に見つからなければ、量子脳のような随伴現象的な説明を余儀なくされる。それは今後の課題とされる。主観的であるため、意識の科学はありえない。今、私はそれが大好きです。巨大な意識の力と私たちは、ロボットでそれを行うことはできませんでした。人間の死生観は完全に覆る。本編その2。人間の自由意志はどのようにして生じるのか。1、